Okay, so yes, for those who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Field. I'm actually one of the two founders of PTFS Europe, and actually it was 18 years ago on the 2nd of November. We were having this discussion last night, weren't we, about how long ago? What was the anniversary date? So we've passed 18 years. So we're on to 19 years. Who knew? Right. So we're going to talk about some of the new. It was billed actually as a sneak preview at 24/11, but of course, because as Andrew mentioned earlier, there's two releases a year, the May and the November release. You actually get them all rolled up. So what I'll try and do is try and cover both and just see how far we get really. So the 24/05 release has 9 new features, 239 enhancements, and 529 bug fixes. That sounds quite like there's a lot of bugs, but often these bug fixes are not bug fixes. They're like tiny little improvements or moving stuff around and stuff. 24/11, which is due out in a couple of weeks now, 5 new features at the moment, still a few weeks left to go yet. 181 enhancements and 541 bug fixes. So that's about 1,300. So yeah, I'm going to go through about 1,500 items now. No, better not. So I think what I'm going to do is what I've done is I've picked out some of the highlights. There's a little bit of favoritism because these are some of the highlights that I actually sort of picked out and liked. So I thought we'd have a look at those and just show you a bit of them. So I might just sit down actually because I'm going to hop between our little test system here. So the first thing is that this is one that's been on the cards as long as I can remember with Koha, really. The ability to take into account, when you do hourly loans, be able to take into account closed hours. So for many, many years, Koha had no concept of being able to define hours. So what we have now, and I'll just make this a bit bigger so make it a little bit easier to see. What we have now in the libraries policy is a new column called the library hours. And if we scroll down, you can now actually set your hours for each day of the week. It's different closing times, open times, closing times. And if you're doing hourly loans, then it will respect those closing times. So if you have a 2-hour loan, the library shuts at 5, and it gets issued at 4, it won't be due back at 6 o'clock, which always used to be the way. So I think that's a great improvement. Looking forward to that one. There is actually a little system preference related to it, which I'll just actually show you because you'll probably be able to see it a bit better. Which is consider the library open hours and circulation. So this really is what do you do with that scenario where you have a shortened loan period? Do you actually consider the library's closed hours, or do you ignore them, or do you extend the loan? So that setting goes alongside with it. Okay, we've got on the ERM front, and some of you will have seen this already because actually we've backported it into our 2311 branch. But if you haven't seen it, in the electronic resources module, and this was actually a UK HSA enhancement, thank you very much, the ability to import KBART files into the ERM module. So within the ERM module, you can create local packages. And then rather than create each individual title one by one, you've now got this option to import KBART files. And just to say that a lot of the publishers publish the details of where their holdings are on this KBART website. There's also a little video of me explaining how this all works as well. On our YouTube channel, oh, it's not in the load. Oh, here it goes. Yeah. So if you want to go and have a little view of that, you can do. Oh, I've been talking about AI too much. Scary. Yeah. Oh, I'm trying to get the views up on my video. Yeah, How do you know? So we create a custom package and then we can load, got the KBART file here, I think. Yeah. and grab a KBART file, and we can decide whether we want to create bibliographic records as well from that KBART files. We can just load them in, and that's been shoved in the background, and that's loaded 1,078 titles. So it's a really quick and easy way to get electronic information into Koha. So that's a really good one, I think. I've left the references in the video just so you can get more clicks on my video. This is a really nice one. The ability to send emails, I think, from the patron details page. So what this one's about is, you probably know this button here already, which is the add message button, where you can add a message for the patron or you can add a message for staff. Well, there's now a new option. And just to show you how this works, I'll just go to tools here and the notices and slips. You'll notice there's a new notice slip called patron custom message. And I've got one here that I created earlier, which is a customer satisfaction survey. So when you create one of that type, you can create any custom message that you might want to send to a borrower and then have it appear on the borrower record. So if I just do add message, I've still got my staff internal, external notes, but I've got this new option here, which is the ability to send them an email. And I can do that in one of two ways. I can freeform just type in a message to them and send it, bang. Or I can base it on the notice text I've already set up, in which case you get this little padlock there and you can just send the message off. So I think that's a great enhancement for all sorts of scenarios, actually. But yeah, customer satisfaction survey, whatever else. In terms of Elasticsearch, I think probably the vast majority of you will be using Elasticsearch as your default search engine now. There's two new things which really put the configuration of it more into your own hands. And those two things are, if we go to the search engine configuration for Elasticsearch, firstly, the ability to create new indexes. So this is at the bottom here. You can actually add your new indexes. So you can create custom indexes based on your bibliographic record. So if you have local fields that you use, which perhaps are not in MARC or on the boundaries of MARC, you can actually create indexes for them and have the data in those fields indexed, combine indexes. So before you couldn't do that. That was all hard-coded. It was basically hard-coded on MARC. So that's really useful if you've got custom fields. And related to that, at the bottom here, the facets that display in searching, you can create your own facets as well. So again, if you have local fields where you might store perhaps information that's useful to you, but nobody else, you can create facets related to that. And you can also base facets on authorized values as well, if you have authorized value lists of things. So that's really good. And you can do nice things like swap your facets around, change the order of facets and so on. So I think that's a nice little enhancement to Elasticsearch searching. Okay, let's moving on. Oh yes, the ability to copy and paste permissions. So again, I think this is actually quite a much sort of needed enhancements. So this is where you can actually take a user's permissions and copy them, and then go to a completely different borrower, go to the permissions, and actually paste those permissions in. So I think that's really useful to be able to quickly sort of move permissions around between users. But I thought I'd also mention, just because you may or may not be aware of it, but there is a plugin called the batch permissions modifier, which is this, which you can add into your system. And that allows you to apply permissions in batch to a group of users. So I think that's more useful when you're first setting up the system and you're doing a lot of this, or you perhaps have a lot of new staff. It's a really quick and easy one. And I think Janet, you recommend it. You'll recommend it a lot, don't you, for new sites? So it's a good one. But I think that just that copy and paste one is a nice enhancement. Patron attributes, there's a new type of patron attribute, and that's the ability to define a date on a patron attribute. So you can have something like an exam date. And you can say it's of a type date. So historically, these have all been free text or controlled value lists. So this is a brand new type. And then if we just perhaps go back to that borrower again. And just edit their record. We actually get a date picker. So it is a proper sort of date authorized value. So again, nice little enhancement. OAI Harvester. So if you don't know what OAI is, it's the Open Archives Initiative. So it's really a way for sharing data between different repositories, open access repositories. So Koha has always had the ability to be harvested as a repository into another system. So for example, EBSCO EDS can harvest the contents of Koha into EBSCO Discovery. But what you haven't been able to do until now is to go out to a third-party open repository and actually harvest the data back into Koha to create a complete collection of data. So this is quite a big one. And just to show you, there's some system preferences relating to it, turning it on, but importantly, under administration, you've got this whole new section here, OAI repositories, and this is where you set up the repositories. So the way OAI works is that you have an open access endpoint, which is the starting point really of the harvest, and you define that. The set, so if there are multiple collections within that repository, within the open access repository, you can say, actually, I only want this collection out of the whole open access collection. So you can be quite specific. You can specify what data the source data is in, where it's perhaps often going to be in Dublin core because it won't be marked data typically. And then you can describe how you're going to transform it. So you might say the Open Archives title field will put into the 245 field. And then in the background, there's a job that runs that will periodically harvest new data out of that collection. So again, it's a useful way, I think, of enhancing your catalog with more data if you want to use the Koha OPAT more as a sort of a bigger sort of repository or collection, if you like. Bookings. So there's quite a lot of things in bookings. So I know in 2311, you probably know there was the new bookings module, and I think a lot of people were very excited about that. We've had a lot of people using it in anger. And a lot of enthusiasm, and therefore a lot of people saying, oh, it'd be great if it did this as well, and it'd be great if it did that. Well, there's a lot more stuff in 2405 and 2411, and there's a lot more stuff to come as well, which is great. So the first thing to say is in 2311, you had to make every single item bookable, which was a bit of a nuisance because you had to go find all the bookable items. In 2411, you can actually make an individual item type bookable. So if we just go to the item types, and just have a look at the visual material, and we edit that, you can see there's a bookable checkbox. So any item that's given that item type will by default be bookable. And if we just have a look at some AV items and have a look at one of these. So if we go to the items tab, you'll see that by default, it says follow the item type. So in this case, as it's visual material, that will be bookable. But if we want to, we can actually set it to no. So if we want to make this an exception, we can actually override that. But you can see by default, it is bookable. So I think that's really useful. Alongside of that is a new report on the circulation page, and that's called the Bookings to Collect report. And that really is for things that are coming up for their booking slot. What do I actually need to go and prepare? You know, is it a projector? Is it a room? So you can actually get a list of all your bookings and actually see what it is you need to prepare. So here we've got you know, a couple of upcoming bookings for that box set. So I know who's going to have it, when it's booked for, and therefore I need to pull it. So that's another nice one. But there's actually a whole bunch of little enhancements that all relate around bookings. So this is really just a snapshot of them. There are actually more. I didn't pull them all out because there are actually quite a lot. But the ability to have warm-up and cool-down periods. So that is, you actually need to allow 24, 48 hours to prepare the booking. When it comes back, you need to allow 24 hours to get it, put it all back in its box and put it back on the shelf for the next person. So that's warm-up and cool-down. Yep, adding records. So more in the database about adding creation, modification, time, status fields, patron notifications, cancellation reasons. So there's just a lot more things in bookings, really. And as I said, there's more to come. Obviously, Andrew mentioned the hourly bookings. Haven't got to that yet, but that's obviously one that I'd love to get to. Yeah, doesn't need much. A big collection on the way out. So there's lots more, I think, that can be done with bookings, but it's really moved on again this time. Additional fields. So again, I don't know how familiar people are with additional fields, but they're there now actually in Koha, and they have been around for a while. So additional fields are where you might not have enough fields in the record for the information you want to hold about that record. So you want to add some because it's a local peculiarity you have, or it's just extra information you can't fit anywhere else. And that's been around for orders, order lines, invoices, subscriptions, account lines for a little while. But there's a new one here now for ERM licenses. And if we just have a look at it, you can see that we can create an additional field. So we can call this ERM seats. And I think I've got one here prepared earlier. You can say whether they're repeatable, searchable. And once I've created it, if I just go back into the ERM module and jump into licenses and create a new license, you'll see that here's my additional field that I just created. So it's a controlled vocabulary list of who this license is actually going to be allocated to. So that's really nice. That's for licenses. I think I saw the change for the additional fields for agreements get pushed a day or two ago since I've done this. So so that'll also be there. But the great thing about the additional fields is I think as we move forward, they're going to go everywhere. So particularly acquisitions 2.0, you'll see a lot of use of additional fields just for things like funds, where you want to store extra information about funds that perhaps don't come into fund codes or account numbers. It's just a really useful way of sort of expanding the scope of what we can store in the database. Interlibrary loans. I mean, Andrew sort of alluded to this earlier, but for many, many years, when we first developed the interlibrary loan module, it was based on a system of backends to the system. And what that meant is if you wanted to just play with interlibrary loans, or if anybody's signing off a bug related to interlibrary loans, they typically had to ask us or their support provider to install the default backend, which was absolute pain for us and pain for you. So what we've done now is we've actually made what was previously called the free form backend is now what's called the standard interlibrary loans form. And it's a standard form that's delivered with every system. As soon as you turn the module on, it'll be there. You can use it. So it'll make testing a lot easier. It looks exactly the same as the one that you're probably familiar with right now that's called freeform. And that's because it pretty much is that. But as Andrew said earlier, this is all about flipping interlibrary loans on its head, where you start with a standard form, an interlibrary loan form, and then make intelligent decisions after that about how you're going to fulfill that request, whether it's based on availability or priority or cost. And yes, there's also a new system preference that doesn't quite directly relate to that, but it's called, I don't know whether you remember, but in previous versions, there was a copyright declaration form for interlibrary loans, and it was, do you agree to this? Yes or no? So we had some libraries who wanted to be more granular with that. So they wanted to say, well, if it's this, we don't need to ask the question. And if it's if it's a certain type of copyright article, we actually do need to ask the question. So this is where it's configured. It's configured, and you can actually do some conditional logic in setting this up to determine when it displays. Yes, absolutely. In acquisitions, small enhancement. Again, Andrew mentioned that we're going to reimagine the acquisitions homepage at some point. But in the short term, before we do that, there's a new enhancement that actually brings the search orders search box onto the homepage, acquisitions homepage, which I think is although it's quite there's quite a lot of search boxes in it, I think it is logical rather than scrabbling around up here trying to find it. But yeah, as Andrew mentioned, we're probably going to try and widgetize this page or something going forward. So that's another one to look out for. Always loads checkouts immediately. So, this is the one I knew would get the round of applause. So anybody get annoyed with this? Always check. Hang on, always check. There we go. And then you go away, and then you come back, and it's like, oh, I have to check it again. Oh no. Well, new system preference. Let's just jump over to system preferences. Always load checkout table. Do. And if we refresh that page, loads it first time, every time. So, oh, come on. So that's a great one, that. It's such a small thing, but yeah. Anyway, you saw in Leader the ability to, don't want to try and gazump Leader, but in Leader, you saw the ability to have the virtual card. Well, now you have the ability to set an OPAC virtual card so that when you log into your online catalog, you should get a virtual card. So very similar, well, same functionality, but in Koha. So not to be outdone, we can do that in Koha now as well. So I think that is useful. Shareable links. This is you'll notice these around and about in different places in Koha. So these shareable links are really when you have tables of data. So the classic sort of example here is I did it earlier, I did that item search, and I just said I'm searching for visual materials. Now, if I was to then say to somebody else, oh, you need to look up the visual materials, they'd have to go and do that search again, and you wouldn't be able to send a link because there isn't a link with the logic of what you've put into that. But what you've got now is the ability to copy a shareable link, send it to somebody, and it will do it and execute the search that you were doing. So again, another useful one, I think. Yes. No, almost at the end. Is that right? Yeah. I know, it's all exciting stuff. I know. No, I've only got the 1300 left to do yet. So won't take long. So you're probably already familiar. Some of the system preferences are moving into HTML blocks. The big one on the homepage, which is the internet main user block, is also moving there. So be aware of that. You can now save the changes on your table settings. There's a few more extra settings. First of all, the ability to set the number of records to display, but also previously, as you moved away from the page, it would forget the table settings that you'd set. So there's now an option to save those between sessions. Again, like that last one I showed you, I think that's quite a useful one. And then just finally, again, Andrew mentioned it. So this this is on the cusp of making it into 2411, touch wood. But first part of Acquisitions 2.0 is to actually rewrite the vendors module in what's called Vue.js, which is the new framework that Koha is using. So largely, it's not significantly different, but the way the search displays and the way you can filter it is easier, I think, and more intuitive. Yeah, so I think that may or may not get in, so we'll have to see. But that's really first parts of Acquisitions 2.0. So just to finish off then, we'll be starting and rolling out around about March time, probably next year. We'll be doing probably in the autumn and the spring, we'll be doing some webinars exactly like we did last year. You'll get the consolidated release notes like you did last year and previous years. So look out, there'll be some stuff going up on the website related to what's coming up. So look out for that. I think
great.
That's it.
John. I mean, I'm very excited from that. Sam and I kept looking at each other going, oh, that's good. Oh, that's good. So yeah, I'm sure you've all seen some really exciting stuff there. So